My name is Brian Banks. I consider myself to be an unusual individual. I experience borderline social anxiety, I am not particularly athletic, and I am not interested in drinking or other activities that are typically considered to be male bonding. Despite my lack of interest in these activities, I am attractive and slim. My most notable quality, however, is my intelligence. I am actually quite bright, and unlike many individuals who are considered to be intelligent, I am also intuitive. Due to social anxiety disorder and having skipped a grade in primary school, I was not behind in terms of sex education. I resided in a lower middle-class neighborhood. It is unclear if this was the case, but there were a significant number of sexually active females my age. I lived at home during college because one of the world's top 5 engineering universities was only a 10-minute commute away. In exchange for assisting the sexually active females in my neighborhood with their homework, I was able to commute to work in only a few minutes. I provided home tests for them or tutoring in various subjects, both in high school and when they went to community colleges. I was tutored, and my tutoring focused on sex between the ages of 18 and 21. I was almost always sexually satisfied, and more than half of the females I trained and who tutored me appeared to be truly satisfied with my sexual abilities as well. I benefited from so much teaching because I soon established a reputation for being patient, discreet, and smart. I was able to connect with my female and male companions on an intellectual level. I facilitated comprehension of the material I was assisting them with. I was consistently kind and gentle during sexual intercourse. I did not disclose to anyone that I had sexual intercourse with any of them, although I believe they informed each other that I had sexual intercourse with 11 different women during this period. Most of these encounters occurred multiple times, despite the absence of a relationship between us. This was a challenging yet highly sought-after quality. Kitty was the only woman present. She consistently went by her street name, Jezebel. Rather than her given name, Whitney, during this time, I was not particularly gentle. However, this was not due to a lack of friendliness on my part. Jezebel is the same age as myself. She is a large woman, as tall as I am, and she outweighs me by 510 pounds. While she is not particularly large overall, her excess weight is concentrated in her upper body and powerful thighs. Her face is ordinary. Those who knew her, including myself, believed she had the most Aphrodite-like physique imaginable. This is likely due to her large size and strong physical attributes, which are not commonly associated with petite women with small breasts. I would consider Jezebel's physique to be consummate. Jezebel was very sexually active, enjoying sex and having the ability to attract almost any male she desired. She was also sporty, having competed in multiple leagues of softball and basketball. While not extremely scholarly, she was not stupid and had more ambition than most of our neighbors in New England. Her main objective was to run an adult studio or website. I tutored her primarily in arithmetic and financial matters that would help her work toward her objective. Jezebel informed me, and I believed her, that she wanted to open an adult studio or website. I was the only male she permitted to engage in sexual intercourse with her in the nude since she was convinced that I was free of sexually transmitted diseases. Despite my efforts, she appeared to derive pleasure from the experience. However, whether she was feigning an orgasm or not, she always emitted a primal scream and subsequently informed me that it was exceptional. Jezebel was the sole female acquaintance who ever engaged in sexual intercourse with me without first providing me with an academic service. I distinctly recall the number of occasions because they left an indelible mark on my socially awkward mind when I arrived at her apartment. She contacted me via telephone at night and inquired as to whether I required sexual intercourse. She subsequently fulfilled her promise. I did not develop an emotional attachment to Jezebel, but I held her in high regard and would have been willing to do anything for her had she not betrayed me during my final year of college. I created a user-friendly, encrypted, advanced proximity detector. It is similar to the Simpleway system used on numerous toll roads in the United States, but exclusively for secure systems. Corporate entities that utilize proprietary systems have adopted a variety of mine detector types. There are numerous federal and state government agencies that utilize these systems. Agencies within the military required that I obtain a security clearance prior to patenting my own innovations. As a result of my ideas, I received a considerable amount of money and patent royalties. I also founded 2 firms with the objective of selling the items in different markets and studying new products. Given that I lack managerial skills and am primarily interested in creating and engineering items, I instructed my attorney to establish a network of shell corporations that control my two functioning firms and employ capable individuals to manage them. I retained ownership of all stock in the ultimate holding company. It would require a sophisticated individual to spend days researching to discover that I never utilized my network of companies to avoid paying taxes. Some of these companies were offshore, making it impossible for anyone to ascertain ownership. Only the CEOs and CFOs of my two operational firms were aware that I was the ultimate authority. Everyone else believed I was merely the salaried leader of one of the operating firm's new product engineering departments. By the age of 24, I had established all of the aforementioned mechanisms and was seeking my long-term relationship with a woman presented a number of challenges, largely due to my borderline social anxiety and the fact that I was no longer exchanging my intellectual capital for sexual intimacy. After exploring a range of online dating platforms and diverse social circles, I finally encountered an individual with whom I felt a profound connection and who reciprocated my interest when I was 26. Allison was arguably the most physically attractive woman I had ever encountered, despite the conventional nature of our courtship. She possessed a striking countenance and an appealing physique. In retrospect, I recognized that my infatuation with her physical attributes, particularly her breasts, was more superficial than most. I failed to recognize that Allison lacked certain qualities that many people value in a partner. During our relationship, I observed that she displayed a striking lack of interest in my profession. She never inquired about it, appeared disinterested, and demonstrated a lack of comprehension when I discussed my work. Allison's lack of interest in my work proved advantageous in terms of a prenuptial agreement. Gail, one of the attorneys who assisted me in forming my corporation and a highly esteemed professional, strongly recommended that I obtain a prenuptial agreement. Indeed, when I was contemplating whether or not to present Allison with the agreement, Gail, an attorney who assisted me in forming my corporation and whom I held in high regard, advised me to obtain a prenuptial agreement. She prepared a prenuptial agreement that was straightforward and easy to understand. It simply stated that the only thing excluded from communal property was any stock, stake, or royalty relating to any firm or patent that either of us held in excess of 10% as of the date of marriage or acquired throughout the marriage. The date of marriage or acquisition throughout the marriage. Allison had her father check it and then signed it without questioning me. Sexual intercourse with Allison was always a source of pleasure. I had been married to Allison for approximately 2.5 years and we had already had our first child, a beautiful little girl named Amber, when I met Jezebel. During a brief, independent excursion to my parents' residence, I proposed the purchase of a new residence in a more affluent community. However, they declined, citing their preference for a simpler lifestyle and their strong connections within the neighborhood. Jezebel appeared to be thriving, demonstrating no weight gain since our last encounter and a more refined attire than I had previously observed. Prior to our meeting for coffee, Jezebel informed me of her latest business venture, while I shared my experience as a salaried employee. Jezebel was attempting to launch a pornographic website but was experiencing financial difficulties. I inquired about the venture and discovered that she only required $225. She required an additional $225 to achieve her desired functionality. I directed Jezebel to meet me again in 1 week at the same coffee shop and time. I considered connecting her with an investor, which she was pleased to hear. When I left, she greeted me with a strong hug and a cheek kiss. I reflected on the situation for a week. The sum of $000 was a mere blip on the screen to me, and despite the questionable nature of the business she had her heart set on, I still held positive sentiments towards her. We met again a week later, and she appeared even more radiant than the first time. Her attire was more revealing, which seemed to indicate that she still possessed the ideal physique. When I had the opportunity to photograph her in college while she was attending community college, her facial features and hair appeared more attractive than ever. The coffee had hardly been placed in front of us when Jezebel was taken aback when I handed her an envelope containing $25. She was visibly moved and began to cry. This was a response I had not anticipated from someone with such a tough demeanor. Jezebel then offered to give me a stake in the website. I respectfully declined, stating that I only intended this to be a gift and did not want any ownership or involvement. She stroked her palm against my thigh in a gesture of affection. She proposed that she would engage in sexual intercourse with me in a manner that would be superior to any other experience I had had in my life, given her physical attributes and level of motivation. I believed that she would have fulfilled her promise, but I respectfully declined, stating that I loved my wife as we parted ways. Jezebel, in a state of emotional distress, asserted that my wife was a very fortunate woman. She then implored me to let her know if there was anything she could do to be of assistance. "It's finished," she announced, "and it's been a great success." I responded with a smile and embraced her. Despite my initial excitement, I released her as soon as I felt her body shift. I was a little upset, but I did not dwell on it. Allison and I had 2 additional children, a girl named Whitney. I did not name her Jezebel, but I concurred with my wife when she proposed it. Subsequently, a male child was born. My sexual relations with Allison were consistently agreeable over time. I observed that she was superficial and materialistic. However, she also exhibited other positive attributes, and I held her in high regard, as the only woman I had ever loved. Moreover, she had given me 3 exceptional children. The most recent, Amber, possessed her mother's beauty and the most admirable qualities of Allison and my personalities. She was also as intelligent as I was, testing at the genius level. However, she was less socially adept than I was. Whitney, my other daughter, was also a lovely child. Unfortunately for her, she exhibited some of the same physical characteristics as me, though not to the same degree as Allison or ERS. Whitney, on the other hand, was the most compassionate, loving, and empathic person I had ever encountered. Her mere presence could brighten up any room. She was also not shy about displaying her intellectual capabilities. Jerry was a cheerful child with an affinity for leisure activities. His inclination towards athletics, particularly baseball and basketball, was likely influenced by his maternal lineage. I developed an interest in these sports to engage in discourse with him about his preferred pastime, as he rarely initiated such conversations. He was not negative about anyone else, he always seemed to be in a pleasant mood and got along well with both of his sisters as well as with Jerry. Given the remarkable nature of their children, one might assume that Allison would be an excellent mother. However, this was not the case. Allison and I had significant disagreements over how to raise our children. I am uncertain as to the cause. Perhaps it was the green-eyed monster of jealousy, but Allison had a strained connection with Amber. She was extremely rigorous with Amber and occasionally nasty in her comments. I had multiple fights with Allison in front of Amber because I could not tolerate her mistreatment of her. I was unable to tolerate her mistreatment of Amber. By the time Amber was 12, she would never go anywhere with her mother unless I accompanied her. One summer, Allison wanted to take the kids to her family's lake house for a week. This became a significant issue when I had to work, necessitating the use of persuasive techniques. It was necessary to persuade Amber to accompany me and to have a serious discussion with Allison to ensure that she would be polite to Amber during the trip. Allison interacted better with Whitney and Jerry than with Amber, but she also had her moments with them. Despite the fact that Allison was a stay-at-home parent, as the non-working spouse, I likely spent as much time with the children as their mother did, given her frequent absences due to professional commitments. The time I spent with them was often of a higher quality. After 15 years of marriage, 3 wonderful children, and a wife I adored and enjoyed sex with, despite the imperfections in our marriage, I was returning home from the airport after a one-night work trip. It was approximately 1, the time was 10 p.m. and, although I had informed Allison of my entire schedule based on my telephone conversation with the family the night before, she had not, as was her custom, paid any attention. Consequently, I was unaware of whether she would be home to greet me. If she were, I was at a stop sign at approximately 3:30 p.m. I was preparing to turn right onto the through street where I reside, hoping for some afternoon delight in the form of sexual intercourse before the children returned from school. Roger Mayberry's unmistakable red Corvette passed by, and I was able to discern that the top was down and he was visible in the driver's seat, fiddling with the radio dial as music blared through his bespoke speakers. Roger Mayberry was a top salesperson in one of my firms, specializing in military sales. He had as good an understanding of our technology as any it was reasonable to expect that an engineer would have such a clearance, and he was easy to work with, like nearly all of our employees. He had a top-level security clearance, even higher than most, because the military applications of our technology were more sensitive than any others. I asked myself, what are you doing here at this time? I had not considered the possibility that he was at my house, which was only 2 blocks away. I was simply wondering. I was perplexed by the sudden appearance of the individual in my residence, particularly given the unexpected nature of his visit. I had pulled into my driveway, entered the home, and upon failing to see Allison on the first floor, proceeded up the ornate, winding staircase that Allison particularly enjoyed and required to reach the second floor. As I approached the open master bedroom door, my shoes made a distinct sound on the marble hallway floor as I was approximately 10 feet away from the door. I then heard a seductive voice remark, "Did you forget?" I was uncertain whether to conclude that she was wearing a rag or that she had decided to make another sperm deposit. I was disbelieving. I entered the main bedroom and saw Allison naked, resting on her back. When she peered up between her spread legs and noticed me, her smile quickly changed into distress. She nearly yelled, "I'm really sorry, O'Brien." Unfortunately, within a moment, my mind had fully absorbed the scenario and sensations of rage, disgust, worry, hatred, and terror were whizzing throughout my brain at breakneck speed. "I'm sure." I remained stationary, my mouth open, as a multitude of emotions coalesced into a singular sensation. An oblique, dark, and overpowering air of melancholy descended upon me. I recall staggering backward a few steps before regaining consciousness in the hospital. It appeared that a monitor had notified the nursing station of my awakening, as a nurse entered my room shortly after I opened my eyes and was followed approximately a minute later by a doctor. The nurse inquired about my condition, addressing me as Mr. Banks. The nurse, Nancy, inquired as if my brain were in a vegetative state. I was pleased to see that I was awake so quickly. She held my wrist and stared at a monitor right next to my bed. I inquired about my condition and how I had gotten to the hospital. Just as the doctor entered, I asked, "Doctor, my name is..." "I am Dr. Petra, and I am a short, charming female Indian doctor. Let me stare into your eyes and then respond to your queries," she continued with Nurse Nancy, still clutching my wrist. Dr. Petra pulled a light source from her pocket and, rather than beaming a powerful beam into my eyes, showed it back and forth while moving my eyelids. The doctor then proceeded to examine the surrounding area of my eyes with her hands, which were simultaneously soft yet firm, for approximately 2 minutes. Upon the conclusion of this examination, the nurse released my wrist. Both the doctor and nurse then displayed a grin, after which the doctor continued, "Mr. Banks, according to your wife, you sustained a concussion after tripping in your bedroom and falling backwards onto the marble floor in your hallway, which resulted in your head hitting the floor. On the stone floor, the likelihood of death was high. However, the patient's vital signs were stable, and the initial diagnosis of a severe concussion was unlikely to be as severe as initially feared." A sense of melancholy returned as the cause of the backward stumble was recalled. The eyes widened, and a loud scream was uttered. Fortunately, Nurse Nancy demonstrated rapid reflexes and had a container ready, although it was not a barf bag. Despite having not eaten lunch that day, the vomit bag was promptly located and deployed. Once the stomach was fully empty, the patient was instructed to lie back. The nurse applied a cold compress to the head, and Dr. Petra conducted another examination. Once the examination was complete, Dr. Petra made an announcement, stating, "I am shocked by your regurgitation. This could indicate a more severe concussion than initially anticipated. However, there are no other indicators. Could my instinctive reaction have been triggered by a memory of an emotional crisis that preceded my fall?" I inquired, already knowing the answer. "Yes, that is certainly feasible," Dr. Petra replied, caressing her chin. "In response to the emotional crisis, I exhibited a negative emotional reaction to seeing another man having sex with my wife. After a brief interval, I emitted a snort, which I considered an appropriate response in the circumstances. I was pleased with myself for avoiding the use of derogatory language in my soliloquy. The expressions on the faces of my medical personnel would lead one to believe otherwise. I continued sarcastically before either of them could show pity or before they fell backwards. "My devoted bride, where are you?" "She was present, but when do you pick up your children from school?" Nancy responded, beginning to regain her composure. I examined the clock, it was 3:28. It is therefore probable that she was collecting them at that precise moment. Dr. Petra inquired as to whether he had eaten recently. His ashen expression remained unchanged, indicating that he had not eaten since approximately 8 a.m. I responded that, given the emotional nature of your regurgitation and the absence of any injury-related cause, it would be advisable to consume something before your wife returns with the children. "Do you think I'll just vomit again when I see her?" No, I don't, Dr. Petra replied. As long as it is something innocuous, Nurse Jenkins, could you please have the kitchen prepare a bowl of porridge with cinnamon and raisins? I must respectfully decline the addition of brown sugar, I replied, turning to Nancy and attempting to be as polite as possible. The oatmeal was delivered within 5 minutes, and I consumed it rapidly, feeling a slight improvement by the time Nancy turned to my room and whispered, "Your visitors have arrived." My 3 children rushed into the room, each eager to be the first to see me. "Please do not touch Daddy's head or neck," I instructed, attempting to hold all 3 of them in my arms. Despite my current physical and emotional state, I was compelled to laugh. The children were speaking simultaneously, each more impassioned than the other. While a sincere laugh would have been inappropriate, a brief, cheerful expression was necessary. I had not seen Alex, and I was so preoccupied with the children that it was evident that Amber had been crying. However, now that she was aware that I was not seriously ill, she was visibly improving. The other 2 children were also. Allison's demeanor shifted from one of concern to one of curiosity as she gazed at the door, seemingly perplexed. I attempted to redirect the conversation away from my injuries and towards the activities the children had engaged in during my absence. Allison also interjected with queries and observations on several occasions throughout the day, but I chose to refrain from making eye contact with her and instead ignored her contributions. After approximately 15 minutes of sustained interest, I heard Nancy address Allison. Allison then declared a brief intermission. Subsequently, the children informed me that their father was still in pain and required time to recuperate. They stated that we needed to depart, and they would kiss his hands farewell and pay him a visit the following day. Once more, the child slobbered on my hands before waving away. It was evident that Amber was in a superior state than when she initially arrived. Jerry appeared to be in good health, but now that she had a clear view of me in my hospital bed from a distance, Whitney began to cry and turned her head. Upon her departure, Allison abruptly called out to the children, "Meet Mommy in the elevator lobby." She then informed me that she needed to speak with her husband privately. I was unprepared for this turn of events and lacked the emotional capacity to alter the circumstances I had previously considered. I simply closed my eyes and listened. "Brian, I am sorry that you had to see me in this state. I never wanted you to discover that I was unfaithful. I apologize. I am not the wife you would expect me to be. I hope that, once you are healthier, we can discuss this." She informed me with a hint of both despair and tears, but no actual crying. She suggested that, if I did not respond, I might feel inclined to speak with her tomorrow. She urged me to call her. She indicated that she had no desire to visit me in the hospital. I would have to initiate contact with her, otherwise she would not attend. Dr. Petra returned approximately 20 minutes after Allison had departed. After another assessment, she stated, "You do not appear to be too distressed after speaking with your wife." I did not discuss the matter with my wife. I simply maintained a stoic demeanor. Despite the loss of my previous life, I am confident that I will be able to channel my emotions into action. I will not be vomiting again, which is satisfactory. "Doctor, how long do you believe I should remain here?" "I require that you remain for 1 additional night. However, if your examination results are favorable, you may depart, but you must limit your activity for at least a week and refrain from entering your office for at least 3 or 4 days. I will honor my commitment." To hold her hand, I promised, on the condition that you do not inform my wife that you will release me in the morning of Friday. Obviously, I cannot expect you to lie to her, but if she cares enough to inquire, can you indicate that I'll have to remain through Saturday? Dr. Petra laughed and said, "I think I can do that as long as I'm not forced to lie outright." In response to a direct query, I will tell Nurse Jenkins the same thing. I ate a full dinner and called my parents. I also called Allison. I had not been informed of this. That night, I went to my assistant residence and requested a legal pad and pen. I was too drained to write down what I needed to do, but I would be ready to begin plotting my strategy. Allison arrived with the children again around 3:50 on Thursday afternoon, as I had feared she had not bothered to come and visit me earlier in the day. I certainly was not going to contact her, though Nancy said she had called the nursing station once to inquire about my well-being. By the time the children arrived on Thursday, I was feeling much better. This was not merely a consequence of my recovery, I had a highly productive day. Several individuals from my office came to see me, as did my attorney, Gail, who had completed my prenuptial agreement. My parents joined me for lunch. While none of these activities were related to my proximity sensor study, they were nevertheless about arranging. The remainder of my time away from work was spent in a state of repose following a brief interlude with the children, as I had directed Nancy earlier in the day. She subsequently entered the room and stated that I needed to rest. Allison's actions were similar to those observed on the previous day, with the exception that I did not respond when she spoke to me. She inquired, "Darling, you never phoned me today to discuss our predicament." I replied, "I suppose I wasn't. It was of sufficient importance to you to ascertain whether I was alive or dead unless I called." I responded, attempting to minimize the sarcasm in my response, but probably failing. She softly said that it was not fair, "Darling. I did not want to bother you if you did not want to speak." After they freed me, I responded snarkily, "I'll probably want to talk this weekend, darling." "I apologize again, Brian. I truly hope we can overcome this obstacle," she murmured, holding my hand and kissing it. I remained stoic. She had never professed love for me or indicated an intention to terminate her relationship with Roger Mayberry. The only indication of genuine distress I could discern was that she had discerned the final 10% of my plan, which I had not yet completed. It would be relatively straightforward to devise a plan. Allison's parents arrived just as visiting hours were about to end. I was initially astonished, but they subsequently revealed the reason for their visit. Allison had not believed it would be an effective strategy to threaten me with the loss of the children if we divorced, so she had her parents do it instead. Allison has informed us about her miscalculation, which was made with the support of her mother. I inquired sarcastically, grasping her hand. "You are aware of this, aren't you?" her mother responded after a long pause. "It is what caused your accident. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive her. Brian, you are an excellent guy and a caring father. I know that not being able to see your children every day would be devastating for you. Ruth, you're correct," I responded, adopting a somber demeanor. However, I was not genuinely solemn, rather, I was merely feigning it. The most crucial aspect of my plan was to secure sole custody of the children. After a few more minutes of perfunctory conversation, Allison's parents received the news that I was convinced their daughter needed them to live. Any ambiguity about my intentions had been eliminated. Dr. Patrick conducted another examination on Friday morning, and then I signed the requisite release papers and was advised to take it easy for at least a week. Scouts honor. I responded with a salute in the style of the Boy Scouts, though I was not a member of that organization. I was unsure of my proximity to the ideal form, but I did find the gesture amusing. I thanked Nancy and offered her $1,500 in cash gratuity, which she was obliged to decline. I then embraced her carefully and left with my assistant, Jack, at approximately 10 o'clock. The time was 12 a.m. Retaliating against Roger Mayberry would be relatively straightforward. I could simply dismiss him from my employ, however, this would not be a sufficient response. My objective was to inflict significant professional damage upon him. What form of punishment would he face if he were to simply take another position in a related sector, earning approximately the same salary? I needed to ensure that he lost his security clearance, which would make it challenging for him to secure a position with a comparable income or status. To this end, I consulted with Gail and a specialist in divorce proceedings. Additionally, I obtained Roger's bank account information from payroll, as his paychecks were direct deposited. The subsequent action I undertook was to visit Jezebel to ascertain her willingness to assist me in obtaining sole custody of my children. My assistant drove me to Jezebel's office, but I instructed him to wait inside the vehicle, despite the fact that Jack would be aware of all my preparations. I had called ahead to arrange the meeting, but Jezebel still arrived. Jezebel's demeanor was simultaneously shocked and excited to see me. I responded with a giggle as she moved her large, lovely body toward me. Due to my concussion, I was unable to reciprocate her enthusiasm with an equally enthusiastic greeting. Instead, we exchanged hand kisses. She then made a remark about my injury, suggesting that it was a direct result of her actions. We then proceeded to greet each other in a more formal manner. The greeting was perfunctory and unsatisfactory, but it would have to suffice. Jezebel appeared to be doing well. She was dressed tastefully but professionally, and it appeared that she hadn't gained any weight since she was 18. She remained the epitome of sexiness. She commanded me to enter her office, seizing my arm after expressing my delight. At the meeting with Jezebel, I promptly addressed the matter at hand and requested her assistance. I informed Jezebel that my grief had resurfaced, and she responded by expressing her desire to help me with whatever I needed. I explained that I was seeking assistance in realizing my long-held dream, and she indicated her willingness to provide support, provided that it did not involve the taking of a life. The remark and her expansive grin as she delivered it elevated my spirits to a greater extent than I had anticipated. In response to your request, I emitted a brief, involuntary laugh. I did not omit any details about the incident. One aspect of my emotional state that I sought assistance with was conveying the significance of my children to me. I even demonstrated this to her. Images of them flashed before her eyes when she learned that my middle child's name was Whitney. She stopped abruptly, exclaiming, "You gave her the name Whitney." I understood her thoughts, and given the circumstances, there was no reason why I shouldn't. I smiled as I replied, "Yes, I named her after my favorite person from my pre-marriage days." During the period of our marriage, she became visibly emotional, beginning to cry and uttering the words, "You scum, you are the reason I have only shed tears on 2 occasions in the last 10 years. I responded with a smile and a gentle squeeze of her hand. "Tears of joy are a wonderful thing," I said. "I could use them right now." She then inquired about a way to facilitate the release of such tears. I suggested that she could help me by posting pornography featuring my wife on my website and then transferring the proceeds from the sale of the images to her bank account. After recovering from her initial shock, she provided a comprehensive account of the situation, offering several well-reasoned suggestions, including one particularly noteworthy recommendation. She emphasized the importance of ensuring that the matter in question is never linked back to her or to you, as it might lead to the discovery of a prior association between you and me. She then inquired, "Is that what you call it?" "There is an association." I laughed. I was told to remain silent. I have a friend who can accomplish this on paper and a website that is even more popular than mine with no questions asked. All you have to do is send cash to him, which he will deposit into your wife's bank account. Let me contact him right now. A brief telephone conversation with Jezebel revealed that she had already made plans. She informed me of the format in which the pornographic film was to be presented and stated that she would transfer the cash I provided to her associate, who would then deposit the same amount in Allison's account. Furthermore, she stated that her associate would require my wife's signature on a document that included a release. I inquired as to whether I could persuade my wife or forge the document. She replied that I could do either, and I agreed to email the document to her. I advised him to wait until tomorrow, stating that I would create a new email account at the library for this purpose and send him an email with the account details when she signed. I smiled, experiencing a natural high. I took the risk of causing pain by giving Jezebel a gentle kiss on the lips as I left her office. Fortunately, shortly after we married, my wife insisted on having her own credit card and bank account, which she wanted to be in her name only. I did not bother to check them. I had previously examined these documents, but I will now undertake a more thorough investigation. I would not encounter any difficulty in obtaining the relevant numbers from the paperwork that she had left in the den at home. I had a number of advantages in terms of pursuing my revenge: bank account numbers from Roger and Allison, Allison's credit card number, and sufficient funds of my own to finance any desired venture. Additionally, Jezebel's assistant, as well as my assistant Jack, were both reliable and trustworthy. I must acknowledge the role of Jack in this endeavor. He is my assistant, not my secretary. He is my highest paid employee, with the exception of the CEOs and CFOs of my companies. He holds an engineering degree and is adept at analyzing data and implementing technical improvements to my unconventional concepts. However, he is also willing to undertake any task, which is why he collected me from the hospital and waited for me at JFK. Additionally, he participated in Division I football during his college years, initially serving as a middle linebacker. Currently, he is 62 years old and weighs 245 pounds, with a significant proportion of muscle mass. He has experienced difficulties in finding suit jackets that do not rip the arms out of them. The potential for complications in my revenge plan was significant, yet I had meticulously prepared and needed to maintain an optimistic outlook. After Jack dropped me off at my house, I did not go inside to see if Allison was there. I ate lunch and then called Allison's phone. "Hello, sweetheart. I'm very delighted you phoned. Would you like me to come see you? Her greeting was somewhat sing-song, likely due to the fact that my mobile number was clearly visible on her caller ID. She was evidently not expecting to hear from me. I responded with a lack of warmth in my voice. I was released from custody early, and I will collect the children and take them for milkshakes. We will be home at approximately 5:30. I must prepare a suitable meal for you, dear, she said, attempting to sound cheerful. Now, do not spoil their appetites. I interrupted her, thanking her for her input on parenting. I replied sarcastically, see you at 5:30. The children were excited to see me. They inquired about my health and were all bubbly about their activities. They were even more thrilled when I told them we were going to get milkshakes at the local malt shop, which they all loved. After all, 4 of us were well into our shakes. I initiated a dialogue with the children, informing them that certain changes were imminent and that they were, at least in part, a consequence of their actions. I began by addressing the matter of faith in a relatively indirect manner, yet the children were quick to perceive the underlying implications. They proceeded to extrapolate from my statements, suggesting that in the event of a potential divorce between their mother and me, they would, living with you, she blurted out, are you guys getting divorced? Whitney asked. Let's not rush to conclusions, I added, attempting to calm them, especially Whitney, who had suddenly developed a hangdog expression. Mom and I are having some troubles, and I don't know how it's going to come out, I continued. However, one thing that I want you to know is that no matter what, we both love you with all our hearts, and that you 3 wonderful animals are not the cause in any way of our troubles. It is important to note that despite the current difficulties, we both love you with all our hearts, and we do not believe that you, our 3 wonderful animals, are the cause of our troubles. Amber, you love us with all your heart, but does your mother love you in the same way? Jerry piped up, attempting to be I attempted to be as diplomatic as possible, placing a hand on Amber's shoulder. Your mother loves all of you. She is simply unsure of how to express it. Let us not think poorly of her, and let us hope that everything works out. Whitney was silently sniffling, but Jerry and Amber appeared to snap out of it, especially when Jerry inquired with 1 year old enthusiasm, are you planning to attend my son's baseball game tomorrow at noon? Dad, I will be pitching against the Ravens. I would not miss that for the world. Son, I chuckled. What events do you have planned for Saturday? Following a day spent in the hospital, we arrived home at approximately 5:20. It appeared that all 3 children were in a good mood. I ensured that at least one child was always present between Allison and me during her greeting. I also went into the guest room, as I did not want anyone to contact her after the children went to bed that night. Allison inquired as to whether I wanted to talk. I informed her that I had a splitting headache as a result of my concussion and that my primary need was to take my painkillers and sleep. I anticipated that it would probably be. I informed her that I would be fitful and that I did not wish to disturb her. I then proceeded to take 2 Tylenol, which I had previously passed off as prescription painkillers, before closing the door. Allison stated that she was available to talk at any time. I was able to avoid any meaningful discussion or intimacy with Allison on Saturday and Sunday with little trouble. I then began implementing my strategy. The first steps were simple. On Saturday morning, I used Allison's credit card to purchase 2 compact high-tech video cameras and motion detectors. On Monday, I procured and delivered to the house tech video cameras and motion detectors. At the library, I printed the porn contract that Jezebel had emailed to me from the account I had set up for that purpose and then promptly deleted it. I also printed new beneficiary and health insurance papers from my company's database and added the pawn contract as the second-to-last item in the stack was marked with the location where Allison was meant to sign them all. I was aware that Allison would be flexible throughout the weekend, but I anticipated that her flexibility would not last very long on Sunday. I handed her the documents and explained that they were work-rated health disability and life insurance forms that needed to be updated. I also informed her that she and the children were I left the paperwork with her and informed her that she could review it at her convenience. I was aware that she would not read the entire document, but she did peruse the first 2 pages when she saw her name listed as a beneficiary. She appeared to assume that, despite my apparent detachment, I did not intend to divorce her. She promptly delivered the documents to me, only a few minutes after I provided them to her. Her signature, if you would be so kind, she said as she handed them to me while I was starting a card game with Whitney and Jerry. Thank you, I replied, and proceeded to place the documents into my open briefcase as casually as possible before dealing the cards. Furthermore, I contacted the CEO of the company I owned, where Roger Mayberry was employed, and requested that the federal agency in charge of our security clearances schedule security reviews for the 5 workers in the Mayberry division are necessary due to the sensitive nature of our job. As with other firms, we are subject to random security checks, as well as random drug testing. This ensures that none of the employees would be aware that the review was initiated by their company rather than the government. Allison insisted on talking on Monday morning after the children had departed. For school, Brian, we cannot ignore what happened. If we do, it will have a negative impact on our relationship. She began by sitting across the kitchen table from me. I was tempted to tell her what the relationship was like, but I resisted. Instead, I informed Allison that I was still processing what I had seen and that I needed time to come to terms with it. I also told her that I needed to be in a better place mentally before we could have a meaningful conversation. I am not inclined to take any precipitous action, she said, after a brief interval of silence. She seemed content, if not happy. I hope you feel well soon, though. I truly want to demonstrate my affection for you. I miss you. I smiled, nearly falling off my chair, and then added, I miss them too. I must travel to the country club for a social committee meeting in approximately 30 minutes and return. At approximately 2 p.m., I will be departing for the school to retrieve our children. Do you require my assistance? In response to my inquiry, she replied, I will be fine without you. Furthermore, motion detectors were installed in the master bedroom. The equipment was handled in less than an hour, with latex gloves worn to avoid leaving fingerprints or DNA. The next step was to direct the feeds to Allison's computer. While the author is proficient with computers, the other individual, Jack, lacks this expertise. The objective is to locate her password, which should take approximately 10 minutes to connect to her PC. The author has the most secure password. I will utilize a cracking program on my laptop to connect it to hers and begin the process. Jack, still wearing his latex gloves, began to suggest potential actions while the program ran. However, he was interrupted by a beep, prompting me to inquire about its origin. I asked if the program was malfunctioning, but Jack responded that it was not. He then informed me that the software had already cracked the password. I was curious about the circumstances surrounding this outcome and asked how it was possible. Jack explained that the software initially tested the password against a list of common ones. The most popular passwords were employed before the cracking algorithm was implemented. The password, Princess, was the 28th most frequent, according to the software. This result was deemed logical. I expressed further concerns about the use of technology, but she did not heed my advice. She was instructed to use arbitrary symbols for her password within 10 minutes. Jack had the cameras recording to a file on after another 5 minutes. He had configured the system such that I could access the file from my office at any time. I also enabled remote control of the cameras and motion detectors. On Tuesday, I went to work in a positive frame of mind and activated the cameras and motion detectors when I left. I then instructed a shell corporation I owned in the Cayman Islands to transfer $10. After transferring the sum of $000 to Roger Mayberry's bank account, I experienced a sense of emotional well-being and physical improvement in my recovery from a concussion. Consequently, I engaged in productive work. On Tuesday night, Allison approached me after the children had retired for the night. She inquired about my intention to return to our bed that night, given that I had been able to work on Tuesday. I informed her that my condition had not yet reached a point of optimal well-being. However, on Wednesday and Thursday, I allowed myself to entertain the notion that Allison had come to recognize the extent of her actions and would eventually terminate her relationship with Mayberry. Nevertheless, this did not deter me from pursuing my objective. I was aware that the footage captured on camera when I left the house or when I carried out my plan was not representative of reality. This was confirmed when I viewed the video from Thursday afternoon, which showed my wife displaying an ecstatic expression as she faced the camera and moaned while Mayberry was having sex with her. I was only able to tolerate a few minutes of the footage, feeling elated because the video was all I needed to try to gain sole custody of the children. My emotional state, characterized by a sense of grief, made for a challenging Friday morning. I posted Allison's Thursday afternoon encounter to the pay porn site for $5. The initial $5,000 was delivered to Jezebel. By Friday night, the porn site had deposited $5,000 into Allison's bank account. The footage was made available for customers to view. Unfortunately, the website lacked a release from Mayberry, so his face was pixelated. However, I was pleased that the film was published on a section of the website called 304 Wives Screw Their Husbands in the Marital Bed. 2 additional movies were added to the pornographic website over the next 2 weeks. Allison received 2 additional $5,000 deposits and another $10,000. The sum of $000 was transferred from another business in the Cayman Islands to the account of Mayberry. It was necessary to take decisive action before Allison and Mayberry examined the end-of-month bank statements and raised questions about the situation. I initially attempted to elicit a response from Allison by initiating a display of emotion, specifically tears. However, she then responded in a voice that was perceived as weak and lacking in conviction. I interpreted this as an indication that she was not yet prepared for the next step. "Sweetheart, please inform me when you are prepared to proceed." The Mayberry security review was conducted the day after the third pornographic video became publicly available for purchase. The circumstances surrounding this occurrence remain unclear. However, the reviewer in question possessed an illicit copy of one of Mayberry's films, which he had previously deceived both Allison and his own bank. Mayberry was the third individual in his group to be interviewed that day. Consequently, it is unlikely that he was aware that his interview was of particular significance. It was of the utmost importance that the CEO receive a copy of the lie detector results, as well as the questions and answers. By the end of the interview, I had received a copy of the transcript. When Mr. Mayberry was hooked up to the lie detector and the introductory questions were answered, the reviewer asked him, "Do you have any activities outside of work that someone could use to blackmail you?" Mr. Mayberry replied, "No, I don't think so," which caused the lie detector needle to move dramatically. The lie detector needle moved dramatically. "I would like to show you a video, Mr. Mayberry." The reviewer continued by pressing a few buttons on his iPad. He asked, "Who is the woman you had sex with 2 weeks ago on Thursday?" Mayberry's face was drained of color as he considered whether he should try to lie or reveal the truth. He realized that either option would be detrimental to his security clearance. He decided to come clean. "Allison Banks, is she one of your co-workers?" Despite the fact that his office is located in the same building as mine, Brian Banks works for a connected company. It is a large building, and it is possible that he never imagined that having an affair with a married co-worker might potentially lead to blackmail. Roger murmured, "I never really thought about that." He then asked, "Have you had any payments from foreign entities since your last security clearance?" "Absolutely not," Roger replied angrily. He then instructed Mr. Mayberry to, "Let me show you this month's statement for your bank account. What are the deposits from 2 Cayman Islands-based corporations were used for?" After a lengthy pause and evident trepidation in his voice, Mayberry replied, "I'm uncertain if this is something I've previously encountered. It appears to be a mistake, likely made by 2 distinct Cayman Island firms, for which we've been unable to ascertain ownership." The critic concurred, "Indeed, someone is setting me up," Mayberry complained, visibly distressed. "Did someone falsify the video of you and Mrs. Banks?" the reviewer inquired, his voice imbued with a discernible sarcasm. Despite the fact that the interview was to remain unbiased, after a few additional questions, the interview was concluded, and Mayberry remained silent. He then proceeded to remove the electrodes from the lie detector. He informed Mr. Mayberry that, until he was given further instructions, he was not to have any contact with anyone related to confidential and secret information. Additionally, he stated that Mr. Mayberry was not to contact Mr. or Mrs. Banks or either of the 2 corporations that had deposited money into Mr. Mayberry's account. Failure to comply with these instructions would result in legal consequences. I was informed that I would be prosecuted. I was in a positive frame of mind on the night of Mayberry's interview. Allison demonstrated her interest in me and initiated flirtation after dinner. We retired to bed as soon as we were certain the children were asleep. I was aware that this would be the final occasion on which I would have close physical contact with Allison. We lay side by side and embraced in a manner that was almost as seductive as her voice. Allison's seductive demeanor prompted me to question her suitability for a straight man. I found myself giggling before looking her in the eyes. "Allison, I will never have sex with you. I am unsure of the number of affairs you have had, other than the one with Mayberry." The expression on your face after spewing out was priceless. Could you clarify what you mean by becoming? She then began to speak in a confused and incoherent manner. She abruptly departed from the bed and proceeded to the guest room. The following day, she directed her gaze towards me in a manner that was clearly unfriendly. After the children had left, I made a phone call and shortly thereafter, the doorbell rang. I was surprised to see Allison standing on the other side. For a considerable period of time, Allison had been a single entity. 304 I responded with a laugh as Allison answered the door. The process server then handed her the divorce papers. I had only heard Mrs. Allison Banks. In addition to the divorce papers, there were stills of her engaging in sexual intercourse with Mayberry on behalf of a pornographic pay website. In addition to the password, I was able to ascertain the identity of the individual responsible for the sale of pornographic films by inquiring with the subject herself, who was situated at the kitchen table. I demanded to know whether she had ever viewed her own image on a pornographic website. This was the method by which she had discovered the material in question. The web address and password for the pornographic site were on the document. My assistant brought it to my attention, and I was astonished. It is not sufficient that you have disrespected me by making a hole in our bed, you have also broadcast it and profited from it. I am unsure of what is going on, she said, her eyes welling up with tears. I got up. Furthermore, he informed me that I was taking the children on a weekend excursion. I was advised to retain the services of the most competent legal counsel available. I was confident that my professional experience in the pornography industry would prove beneficial, as it would undoubtedly be required on the same day. Mayberry was promptly dismissed and removed from the premises, and his security clearance was revoked approximately an hour later. Prior to my departure to collect my children for the weekend, my secretary contacted me via the intercom. She informed me that Brian had received a report indicating that Roger Mayberry was in a state of inebriation and chanting my name in the parking lot. In response, I inquired as to whether the police should be contacted. I then proceeded to call Jack and request his immediate presence. I deemed this situation to be somewhat unusual. It was a welcome turn of events when Jack arrived. We proceeded to a window in our building to ascertain Mayberry's whereabouts. He was situated in a location offering a favorable view from one of the security cameras. His erratic movements indicated a potential impairment. We promptly formulated a plan. Jack exited through a side door and maintained surveillance. Adjacent to the building, just out of view of the camera, I boldly walked out the front door as soon as Mayberry saw me. He then proceeded to verbally assault me, claiming that I was screwing a whole bank, that I was the one who fired him, and that I was the one who ruined his security clearance. I knew it, he said. I'm going to kick your bomb. I then proceeded to a location that was not visible to the camera. From my vantage point near Jack, I allowed Mayberry to advance to a point where he could strike me. The impact was merely glancing, yet I collapsed as if I had been struck by a powerful blow. As Mayberry rose to deliver another punch, Jack intervened, grasping him and striking him once in the jaw with a forearm. Mayberry was propelled backward by a force equivalent to that of an opposing running back's tackle. Jack provided assistance, and I appeared to be in a state of intoxication while leaning against a vehicle. The incident was captured on security cameras, and law enforcement personnel arrived within 3 minutes. He was restrained by shackles attached to the stretcher that was utilized by the fire department ambulance for his transportation to the medical facility. One of the law enforcement officials was present with him during this process. After completing the necessary documentation to pursue legal action for assault, I proceeded to retrieve the children and subsequently traveled to a mountain resort for the duration of the weekend. At the conclusion of our stay, I informed the children of the circumstances that had transpired. Allison and I were divorcing, and Amber appeared happy. The other two were quite calm about it. I promised them that we would both be as kind to them as possible when we returned Sunday night. Allison was not quite as unpleasant as I had expected in anticipation of her potential meltdown. I had moved all of my most important possessions. I relocated a significant portion of my wardrobe to a temperature-controlled storage facility, with no intention of leaving the house. However, following the children's disclosure of our enjoyable weekend, Allison and I engaged in a discussion. Brian, I am aware that you orchestrated this video, but I am uncertain about the technical aspects of its production. The initial remarks were, however, in a more conciliatory tone than I had anticipated. I would have expected no apologies, that was an error. Please forgive me. I asked merely to blame me for something that all the evidence shows I did not do. I responded in an attempt to seem outraged in case she was recording our chat. Brian, I've been busy this weekend. I hired both an attorney and a computer specialist. I'm not sure. It is evident that you have taken considerable measures to conceal your actions, and it will undoubtedly be challenging for me to overcome the perception of being an unfit mother. However, I am optimistic that we can reach a mutually acceptable custody arrangement. I propose the following: I will grant you sole custody of the house, ensuring that the children do not have to relocate, if you agree to the following conditions. In addition to the liberal visitation schedule, I will also provide you with a residence in Mayberry so that you can pursue your interests. I am aware that he is not only unemployed but also has experienced a significant career setback. I would like to share a residence with Roger. This matter has never been about that. She attempted to interject, but I swiftly cut her off. I do not wish to hear any further objections, Allison. I have reached my limit. I regained my composure and stated, you are free to cohabit with whomever you choose. I am indifferent to that decision. She then added, I am aware that you believe I am a poor mother, but I am not. I adore my children and cannot fathom the idea of living apart from them. Furthermore, I do not see how it would benefit either of us. I am aware that we may be required to engage in litigation. I anticipate that you will attempt to portray me in a negative light and that I will be unable to withstand such an attack. Neither of us desires for the children to be privy to the specifics of the proceedings or to view the recorded evidence. I concur that we should refrain from disclosing the details to the children. I am curious to know your proposed course of action. He proposes that we agree on a mediator, suggesting a former family court judge would be ideal. I am amenable to either sole or joint custody, and I believe you are as well. We will allow the mediator to analyze all relevant factors, including the children's requests, and we will abide by his decision. This approach will facilitate a discreet and expedient resolution. She elucidated that I was actually quite surprised at her capacity for rationality. I believe she recognized that I exhibited a personality that was more pronounced than she had previously acknowledged. I am sure that she had engaged in numerous lengthy conversations with Roger Mayberry. Let us schedule a combined meeting with our attorneys at the beginning of next week to work out the details. I must respectfully object to the proposition that I would seek joint custody. I consider such an arrangement to be unduly burdensome for the children. Instead, I am prepared to accept exclusive custody, should the mediator order it. However, I am not proposing this as a solution. I have allowed Allison to use the main bedroom while I have slept in the guest room. I have not informed her of this arrangement. I was motivated to reveal this information because I was concerned about increasing her stress level. However, now that everything was out in the open, I was unable to sleep. On Tuesday, we held a joint meeting with our attorneys. We instructed our attorneys to simply perform the tasks we requested in a lawful manner and to avoid any form of negotiation. We drafted a contract that provided for the distribution of all marital assets was to be divided according to the 50/50ths rule, with the exception of those assets exempted by the prenuptial agreement, which constituted 90% of the couple's fortune. The mediator's name and the ex-wife of the mediator, a family court judge with a solid reputation, were to be included in the proceedings when the hearing was planned and when the mediator's confidential verdict was to be based on the amount of child support. In the event that custody of a child was granted to Allison, the financial support to be provided by me would be equivalent to that which I would have paid to Allison for a period of 2 years, or until such time as she remarried, whichever was the earlier. This would be subject to limits on her association with Mayberry in any capacity, should children be present. She expressed disquiet at this stipulation but stated that she had no desire to see him again. We agreed not to communicate with the children in any manner that might influence their statements to the mediator regarding the extent of Allison's expenditures at my expense for a new residence, whether a house, condo, or apartment, in the event that I obtained sole custody and she was required to relocate from our current residence. We also discussed the specific arrangements that would be in place if we were to obtain joint custody and what the visitation rights would be as follows. In the event that either party obtained exclusive custody of a child, it took all day to work out the specifics. However, we concluded the possible media outlets that could be contacted the following day. He promised to handle the lawsuit and his compensation, which would be 50/50ths from our shared assets and not subject to the prenuptial agreement. We even scheduled a 2. The meeting concluded with a briefing and a 4. We were informed that Allison was included in the contract. However, we discussed it privately and agreed that neither of us would bring any other individuals into our shared residence. Furthermore, we agreed that once the custody arrangement was finalized, the individual who needed to leave would do so within 2 weeks. I also agreed to have my attorney threaten the pay porn site with a lawsuit if they did not remove the recordings and refund the financial compensation was a non-negotiable aspect of this agreement. It required no additional effort on their part. Jezebel was contacted, and she took care of it. While awaiting the hearing, Allison and I maintained a respectful and cordial demeanor. To the best of my knowledge, neither of us sought to influence the children. Even in private, we refrained from making any disparaging or sarcastic remarks. The only instance of discord occurred when Allison engaged in a topless stroll through the house while the children were asleep or otherwise not around. Regardless of whether the children were asleep or awake, I was aware of her motivation. However, in frustration, I inquired once more. I want you to take a comprehensive last look at what you're relinquishing. Despite my awareness of the upper hand I held and the potential for shared custody, I was on the verge of insanity due to my intense desire for exclusive custody. The hearing proceeded smoothly, albeit shortly before the judge commenced the proceedings by interviewing the children. He made some marks that caused me considerable concern. It appeared that he was leaning towards joint custody. However, after interviewing the children, he introduced an unexpected element into the proceedings. I noted that the agreement had been for me to observe the interviews with the children via closed-circuit TV. The mediator replied, "I'm sorry, but I can't agree to that. I apologized for not understanding this until a few minutes ago. However, this would have a detrimental impact on the required candle and trust with the youngsters. In the event that either of you is unable to agree to my meeting with each child in private, I will be forced to return your money and propose another mediator. The children's interviews were scheduled for tomorrow. Please notify me of a day when they will be absent from school by that point." I was almost tempted to declare that I disagreed and that we could find another mediator who was less likely to favor the possibility of shared custody was initially considered, but my counsel advised against it, particularly given the animosity between Amber and Allison. Additionally, the mediator's previous experience as a judge indicated a tendency to prioritize the children's requests. Amber was on the verge of reaching the age of majority, entitling her to greater autonomy under state law. The court was inclined to give her input greater weight than that of any other mediator. Upon returning home, we convened with our attorneys and reached a consensus on the mediator's stipulation. We also agreed to refrain from questioning the children about their statements at dinner that night. However, Allison did make certain statements that I believed the children would interpret as an expression of a desire for joint custody. I simply gave her a stern look and said nothing. Amber responded by catching my eye and smiling faintly. The following day, the mediator subsequently, each child was interviewed separately. The interview with Jerry lasted approximately 20 minutes, while Whitney's interview lasted approximately half an hour. Amos's interview was conducted after a delay of over an hour, during which time it was assumed that Allison and her attorney were not observing. After the interview, Amos signaled to me with a thumbs-up gesture, in accordance with the previously established agreement. Following the interviews, the children were taken out for a meal by their respective parents. They were instructed to return to our residence at approximately 4 p.m. Following the lunch interval, the mediator was prepared to make a decision that was not foreseen by the contract, which allowed for a further week to be allotted for decision-making. However, the mediator then refused to hear the attorney's 30-minute closing arguments. After evaluating all of the material available to me, I have concluded that the best interests of the children are served by awarding exclusive custody of all 3 children to the father, Brian Banks. I have also determined that the contract entered into by the parties prior to the case being filed is reasonable and in the best interests of the children. Consequently, the matter will be settled on those same terms on Monday. I will send you a certified copy of this summary decision to submit to family court along with your settlement. A certified copy of this summary decision shall be submitted to family court along with the settlement. I extend my gratitude for placing your trust in me and wish you the best in the future. Allison and I experienced disparate emotional responses on the drive home. I was disinclined to engage in self-aggrandizement, whereas she was despondent. The anguish that I had previously encountered with Paul resurfaced. Despite the finality of our family's divorce, which was on the most favorable terms possible for me, given the necessity of a separation, Allison remained unconcerned when we informed her children that night. Consequently, I was compelled to assume the majority of the communication responsibilities. Jerry and Whitney exhibited visible sadness and expressed their affection for Dallas through a heartfelt embrace, while Amber embraced her in a more reserved manner. I provided positive commentary about Allison and delineated the nature of the visit. I procured an additional residence for Allison within a week of the hearing, and she subsequently took up residence therein within the agreed-upon time frame. The children and I provided assistance, as did Allison's parents and brother. We engaged the services of a moving company for the transportation of larger items. She was taking items from our house, including the king-size bed, when the divorce was finalized. The master bedroom became available a few months later. I organized a victory party at my house to thank everyone who helped me, as well as my closest friends and parents. I did not inform the children of the purpose of the party, I merely stated that it was a celebration. Amber, who was now 13, had discerned the true nature of the celebration just as the visitors were about to arrive. I was engaged in last-minute preparations in the den when she entered and closed the door. She then directed me to sit down, and took a seat on my lap. "Daddy, are you pleased that the custody arrangement came out as it did?" she inquired. "Amber, I am gratified to inform you that the custody arrangement has been finalized." "Why are you asking? Does it truly matter that she was unfaithful?" I would have declined to accompany her if she had been granted custody of me, and I was aware that it would be more beneficial for Jerry and Whitney to remain in our care. I simply thought you would be interested in this information. She then kissed my cheek, got up from my lap, and left. I decided not to pursue the matter further. I did, however, pursue the matter further, beginning with the victory celebration. Jezebel arrived at the party looking like $1 million. She instantly connected with Jerry and Whitney for almost a half hour. She and Jerry played catch and pepper, a baseball bunting and fielding game. She was far better at it than I ever was. Jezebel sat down. In the subsequent conversation with Whitney, the nature of their discussion remains unclear. However, they engaged in conversation and laughter for approximately an hour. Amber exhibited a more reserved demeanor towards Jezebel than the other two children, yet she appeared to hold a positive regard for her. The topic of discussion shifted to fashion. Amber did not include me in the recording of our family. Approximately halfway through the celebration, Jezebel led me to the den, grabbed me, and whispered, "You no longer have an excuse not to let me engage in sexual intercourse with you. Have your parents care for the children tonight, and come home with me. I swear you will be ready to engage in sexual intercourse when I allow you to return at 10. The time is 12 a.m. However, I cannot guarantee that tomorrow you will be coherent." When she saw the expression in my eyes, she didn't wait for a vocal response. Instead, she planted a careless kiss on my lips and swung her bump exaggeratedly as she walked out of the den that night. Jezebel nearly drove me insane as I was leaving. I told Jezebel, "I'm not sure what you see in me, but God damn it, I love being with you. Do we have a shot at a meaningful relationship?" She licked her lips while gazing into your eyes. "I perceive you as a benevolent, magnanimous, and astute individual. Would you be amenable to a 3-day excursion to a resort on the 14th? This could be an opportunity to ascertain whether we are both inclined towards a committed relationship. Candidly, I am weary of inconsequential interactions. I am seeking a partner who is exclusively devoted to me." She bestowed upon me another kiss and then proceeded to close the door, remarking, "I must return to my lovely offspring. 2 years have elapsed since my triumph celebration, and my circumstances have undergone a notable transformation. My 3 children are thriving. Allison has not engaged in any wrongdoing and has fully utilized her visitation rights without abusing them. Furthermore, Amber's relationship with her mother has improved significantly since they were a family. In fact, Amber accompanied her and the other 2 children to Allison's parents. She spent 10 days at the lake house last summer and returned with no unfavorable complaints. Additionally, my business is thriving. I am currently earning more than ever before. My ownership in the operational corporations was unintentionally disclosed, however a report we filed with the government was distributed to a number of employees who we had not intended to receive it. This has been rectified and there is no longer any negative perception of me." Roger Mayberry left town shortly after the victory party, and according to the lone employee who has maintained contact with him, he is now working as an entry-level sales representative for an electronics company on the West Coast that does not deal with sensitive technology. I am a sales representative for an electronics company on the West Coast that does not deal with sensitive technology. The children have accepted Jezebel as a friend rather than a mother figure, and they enjoy her presence. After 2 years, we concluded that we needed to be exclusive. Last month, she sold her pornographic website and moved in with the kids and me. Although she does not desire to marry, she simply wishes to maintain a friendship and maternal role with the children while continuing to oversee the operations of a small online clothing boutique. I extend my gratitude for your attention to today's narrative. If you found this account engaging, I kindly request that you express your appreciation by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. Should you have a personal or third-party narrative to share, I encourage you to contact me.